Hey, welcome to WACTS. This is episode 8. This week we're going to cover it from March 3rd to March 9th, 2015. Look, I got a haircut. That's cool. We're going to talk about a new architectural visualization method I'm working on. We're going to talk about a couple post-apocalyptic TV shows. We're going to talk about a couple kind of tedious movies. We're going to talk about a couple board games. It's going to be great. We got a new episode of Better Call Saul, episode 6. It's called 5-0, and maybe a couple other things like podcasts and video games, stuff like that. And we're going to get right to it. Bam! Architecture. So just a quick little update in the world of architectural visualization and all that magic. I'm using Unity a little bit right now for a non-VR purpose. I've only done this actually a couple times. It's mostly been VR, but like when I was working for the Park Avenue Armory doing a big thing for Kenneth Branagh's Macbeth back in May of last year, I was using Unity to very quickly set up how the room was going to look with the set design and some simple animations, and get some sight lines of what that would be like. And now similarly for another project, we needed a way to look at the grid and the catwalk area of this project and understand it quickly, and it's part of a huge Revit file that's like 5,000 megabytes and all these different Revit files connected, and very hard to get in there and really get a sense of what it looks like. I mean, we can cut sections and we can kind of use the section box and get in there a little bit, but still very difficult to understand it. So I was trying to think, okay, well, if I could get what we needed, basically using the section box from Revit into Unity and keep a high frame rate, we could really start to understand the space. So I was looking at being able to create like a God mode camera where you can zoom around up top and also zoom in there really close and like walk around. So, you know, we were looking at where the 4-foot clearance for things were and where the 7-foot clearance for things were. So basically where we could put the equipment we needed to, and then also how tall a person could be. And then I added a couple other little features like, you know, whatever you're looking at, it'll give you the Revit name for it. So that's kind of cool. And anyway, just a cool little thing that I just started doing. Unity 5 just came out. That was great. I saw the keynote address last week. Really fun. I can't wait to do more with Unity 5. It's a really cool program, right on the cutting edge. Whee! Video games. So you might remember a few weeks ago I was talking about 007 Nightfire and how even though it's on the PS2, it's still like one of my favorite multiplayer games because it's just really great for with a multi-tap and you get a bunch of friends and there's all sorts of wacky things like helicopters and tanks and all these characters from James Bond. The only PS3 game I have right now that even comes close to that is 007 Goldeneye Reloaded for PS3, which I think made Pierce Brosnan very sad because he must have been like, oh, they rebooted my game, but then it's actually Daniel Craig, so poor Pierce Brosnan. But it's actually, it's a decent multiplayer game. The biggest problem is there are no bots. So you can only play with as many people as you have in the room with you unless you want to go online and deal with a bunch of 12-year-olds calling you the F word. There's a lot of F words, calling you all sorts of different F words. So, you know, I play with my friends and we can get 4 players going. I got a couple little like Chinese knockoff PlayStation controllers, which I'm pretty good at the game, so I play those and that gives me a bit of a handicap. It's cool. But, you know, there's no bots. So sometimes we'll end up on a really big, beautiful map and be playing, and it just takes forever because there's only 4 of us and, you know, we want there to be more. So it really bums me out that ever since the advent of like online multiplayer, programmers just kind of stopped bothering programming AI bots. It wouldn't seem like it's that hard because usually in a single player campaign, you still have those AI elements, you know, following you around trying to shoot at you. Why couldn't we have just continued to drop those in the split screen thing, which is still, you know, a lot of fun, especially now that people have bigger screens. You know, when everything's split screen, you still can actually get a decent chunk of real estate there to see what you're doing. So anyway, we were playing that. I just want to say that it's still a pretty fun game. You know, I wish there was some of the wackier elements like the weird helicopters and tanks and bombs. And, you know, there's a mode called Escalation, which would be really cool. It's basically where you start off with like a pistol and every time you kill someone, you get a slightly better weapon. I think that's a great idea. I wish there was more variety in it. I wish it allowed for grenades and mines and C4 and claymores and all that kind of stuff, or at least different weapon sets, but it's exactly the same weapon set no matter what map you're playing, no matter who you're playing with. So I wish there was a little bit more variety there. So it feels kind of like an undercooked duck. I don't know why I'm thinking about duck. Mock duck, best vegan thing ever. Check it out. But 007 Nightfire, 007 Goldeneye Reloaded, still pretty fun. I give it 3 stars with a confidence of 5. Just the multiplayer though, I haven't really played the single player. Board games! So as you might have guessed from that video game discussion, I had some friends over this weekend and all sorts of crazy things happened, some of which I will cover in a few weeks' time. Huh, what could that mean? We played a couple board games. One new one I'd never played before is called Alhambra. This is a really cool game. I'm surprised I never played it. It's very architectural, feels a little bit like Carcassonne, you're like laying tiles and stuff, but then also in games like Agricola where you're like building a farm, it's a tile laying, you know, pattern, architectural building kind of game. I'm sure there's a more technical term for it than that, but basically it's a really fascinating game where you're building a palace. Alhambra is an actual palace, and you're trying to do a few things. You have different kinds of money. There's 4 different kinds of currencies, and each of those currencies can buy different tiles on the board, and those tiles have different values, a little bit like Acquire or Monopoly, any game where you have different tiers of valuable things, and you can chase after all the cheap ones because maybe you're assuming no one else is going after those, or you can go after the more expensive ones and valuable ones, and you're going to get the most victory points for those at the end. There's 3 scoring rounds over the course of the game, and at each of those points you get points, victory points. There's a big victory point track in the middle of the board for having the most of those kinds of architectural features in your palace. So as you're building your palace, everything needs to be orthogonal, adjacent, it all needs to align, and also you need to be thinking about where the walls are, because you also get points for having the longest wall, kind of like the longest road in Catan. So it all needs to be connected and contiguous, and that's really cool. And there's just a lot of really kind of novel things going on in this game. The different currencies is a really cool thing. When you're picking up money, which is a little bit like picking up trains in a game like Ticket to Ride, you have the option of picking up 1 piece of money that is worth more than 5, so it's going to be, maybe 6 to 9, or 2 pieces of money, which could be different currencies that add up to exactly 5, so maybe a 2 and a 3, or a 4 and a 1, something like that. And that's an action. So the other actions are, there's ways to rearrange your palace, because you have like a holding area for things, and you can like deconstruct a piece and then flip that, and that takes a couple turns, a little bit like my game Rum Run. That's actually what that reminded me of the most. And then the most efficient way to go about the game, though, is you get a free action if you are buying something for exact change. So you can overpay for something and still get it, but then that's your entire turn. But if something costs 9 and you have exactly 9 money in that currency, you can take that and you can take another action, whether that means taking more money or buying a second building thing. And you could buy, if you had exact change for like all 4 buildings on the board there, you could buy all 4. That actually happened once in the game, and that's really cool. So anyway, there's a lot of great strategy going on in this game, even if you don't win. I find that in general when I play with women, and I feel this way too, that if you can play a game where you're building something, it's nice to be able to, at the end of the game, even if you didn't win, be like, look at this cool thing I made. Other games like that are like Agricola, something like Galaxy Trucker, where you could be like, look at this awesome spaceship I made. So I really think it's a really well done game, and I'd like to keep playing it a few more times. But just after 1 playthrough, I'm going to give it 5 stars with a confidence of 2, because who knows, maybe next time I play it I'll hate it, but I don't think so. We also played Dominion Seaside, which I've talked about. This second time I wasn't as warm about it. I think a lot of the cards in there actually really, you'd never want to play with. They're dumb cards. That's all I'm going to say about it. So I forget what I gave Dominion Seaside before, but I think I'm going to drop it down a little bit. There's only a few cards in that whole expansion that I really want to play with, so I'm going to only give it 3 stars with a confidence of 4 now. Settlers of America. I don't know if I've talked about this. I don't think I have, but this is a game I really like. I've played this quite a bit. It has fantastic replay value. It was a present from Liz's brother from a few years ago, and his way of describing it was basically, it's like Catan, but has some really fascinating new mechanics, and it fixes a lot of the problems with Catan. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've never been a huge fan of the original Settlers of Catan. I think it has a lot of issues that are solved by the expansions. I really like Cities and Knights. But yeah, this is actually, if I had to pick one Catan game, and I honestly think all of them are really well done. Catan is one of those franchises that could sell out and could get by with just making every kind of spin-off or, like Monopoly, that kind of thing, of different things without actually changing the rules. But they actually really do consider in a very delicate way how to best take advantage of different scenarios they're setting up to really, give you the most bang for your buck, really. Even something like Traders and Barbarians, which I barely scratched the surface of, it costs the same as all the other expansions, and it added like 100 different ways to play the game. I found it a little bit overwhelming, but we're not talking about Traders and Barbarians right now, because I haven't even played that in years. Settlers of America, you have a big map of America, and it's like Catan because you're rolling dice and you're collecting resources and you're buying development cards and, cities and settlers and all that kind of thing. Actually, just settlers become cities. But what makes it really cool is there's a kind of cooperative dynamic that doesn't occur in Catan that's really cool here. Like in Catan, for example, you're building roads and you're building ships, and the only way you're really interacting with each other with those is you're blocking people. It's basically, ha, I got here first, now you can't. In this, there's a couple things that are really cool. First is a manifest destiny element, where everyone starts out on the east coast of America, and you have to migrate out to the west coast because all of those number tiles, which decide how many resources you get on a roll, those actually move out to the west, so you have to expand and build more cities. Building cities is a lot easier. You basically have a little settler, Oregon Trail style wagon, and that goes out there and that automatically creates a city. But this other really cool element is you are building railroads, and those railroads have trains on them, and you can actually ride on the rails of your opponent's trains. You just pay them a little bit of gold, and gold is nice in here, and that's one of those elements that fixes some of the problems of Catan, because anytime there's a dice roll where you don't get anything, you get a gold. And I think I've actually started just adding that into normal Catan games where, you know, it can be really frustrating if you keep rolling the dice and you're not getting anything. So, you know, you roll, you don't get anything, collect a gold. And actually, you know what, I'm actually going to modify that a little bit, because I won this game and it actually wasn't super satisfying this time, because there was, and this was purely a chance-based thing, but everyone else was kind of screwed because I rolled a robber, which is a 7 at the beginning, and put it on, you know, a 6 forest that everyone was on except for me, and then no one rolled a 7 for a really long time. And in a game like Cities and Knights, you can actually, you know, activate a knight and chase the robber away, and the only two ways that the robber can go away in this is 1, by rolling a 7, or 2, by having a development card that says that. And people were buying a lot of development cards, no one was getting that one, and I was feeling really bad. Like, you know, it's a totally normal strategy to put the robber in a place like that, but it was really hurting everyone else, and it gave me a really unfair advantage at the start of the game that was, you know, everyone did a great job of coming back, but it kind of reached a point where, you know, it felt like it's kind of inevitable that I'm going to win, it's just a matter of time. So in the future, you know, I don't know how often something like that would happen again, but I would actually also add gold for rolling a number that the robber's on, and I think the rules explicitly say not to do that, but gold for anyone who's not producing no matter what. And then I would almost have it so that you could pay something to chase the robber away. Maybe it's 3 gold. Anyway, though, I'm getting on all sorts of different tangents, but I highly recommend you play this game. The fact that you travel on your opponent's rails is a really cool thing. You win the game by delivering goods. Every time you build a city that frees up a good, there's this great little railroad yard that everyone has. And once you deliver all your goods, then you win. But you deliver the goods to other people's cities, so it forces you to, you know, travel and interact with the other players on the board. So just really cool, really well-designed game. All the development cards are fantastic. It's perfect for 4 players. I've never played it with 2, 3 players, it's fine too. But it's great. I super recommend it. 5 stars, confidence 5, Settlers of America. Check it out. Podcasts. I'm still so in love with The Last of Us. I'm talking about podcasts here, and I needed some kind of fix after beating that game last week, and I've been replaying it a little bit, and I've already, you know, gotten through the game a lot quicker. I'm already up to the part with Bill, who I just found out is gay. That's kind of cool. His partner has hung himself. He was his actual partner, so that's kind of cool. I like that a lot. And I've had a couple podcasts with the Indoor Kids that I think I listened to back in the day, but it really didn't make any sense to me because I hadn't played The Last of Us, and I don't think I was even going to, so I'm glad I didn't remember any of the spoilers that were covered. But one with Troy Baker and one with Neil Druckman, just talking about The Last of Us in the game, and it's beautiful how much thought was put into this. Troy Baker talks about the acting and the motion capture and the way that they get really, you know, revved up for certain scenes, and the way that some of the scenes at the beginning were actually done last, and how you had to go in these really dark, deep places that aren't, you know, the kind of thing you typically expect an actor to have to do for a video game. And that was really cool. And then Neil Druckman talks about everything from, you know, the color palettes in the game and the way that there's this juxtaposition and contrast element where horrible things are happening on beautiful days and kind of lovely, beautiful moments are happening in horrible weather, and everything from like the angles to the way that there's like tension and release. You know, you go through a really intense battle and then everything kind of relaxes for a little bit and you just kind of go around and collect items and look at this kind of serene, beautiful environment. And you know, the way he talked about it, like you might look at this sidewalk that's totally flooded and it's kind of flickering off the light and you're like, God, that's gorgeous. But then you also think about the fact like, man, but people should be walking on this, like it's a very public part of Boston or whatever, and you know, this should actually be an active, busy place, and all these reminders of the way the world used to be but now are, and these remnants of human life. And it's just such a beautiful game. I'm so impressed by it, and I can't recommend it enough, and these podcasts are both fantastic. I give both of them 5 stars with a confidence of 5. TV. This doesn't really fit into the TV section, but I want to bring it up because it's going to flow into the other things I'm talking about. Totally on a whim, my wife was working late on Monday night this week, which technically should have been in the last video, but don't worry about it. And I went to a screenwriting seminar. I was looking on Meetup, like, what can I do until late tonight? And I found this, you know, guy a couple blocks away, is a New York City great, who is teaching a screenwriting class that usually costs a lot of money, but it's $5 for the first session. So I thought, that sounds fun. I got to sit down, and it was a class of like 20 people in this little, you know, tiny room as New York tends to be upstairs, and I really expect it to feel like, I've read a lot of playwriting books, a lot of screenwriting books, a lot of stuff from like William Goldman and Robert McKee and all those different gurus and all that kind of thing. And I expected here just that kind of regurgitated hero's journey and that kind of stuff. And honestly, this guy had a very refreshing approach to the whole process of screenwriting. It's more than just that, write every day, write what you know, that kind of stuff. Like he helped open my eyes a little bit to the natural abilities we have to write, and then playing to those strengths, and then also finding ways to bounce off them. For example, he put us through all an exercise where we just wrote down very quickly, here's a movie I liked recently, here's a song lyric I can't get out of my head, here's something I know I'm really good at, here's something I'd like to work on. And we all, a few of us went around the room kind of talking about that, and he's pointing out how you really get a sense of who each of the people are in the room based on these very quick things we're just writing off the top of our head. And he talked about that as kind of a way to rev up your engine for writing. And for me, it was very quickly apparent that I'm the kind of guy that always needs to have a fire burning and always needs to be busy and always needs to be doing something. And we talked about how it'd be very easy for me to write a character that also is similar to me in that kind of frequent activity needing. And also, though, what I had never thought of before is he says, anyone that has a personality trait that they're very aware of, they should also be aware that they probably actually can write the opposite of that personality trait very well. So me writing a very active character, it's probably also possible that I could write a very zen, quiet, relaxed character, because maybe that's something that I covet, as Hannibal Lecter might say to Clarice Starling. It's something that I think about a lot, like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be able to just sit down and be in a sense of total relaxation and not be thinking about the 1,000 things that I'm working on. And he's right, it's absolutely the kind of thing where if you're thinking about that kind of thing a lot, yeah, you probably have a good sense of how to write that, because it's something you wish you could do. A lot of great writers are able to write characters, like George R. R. Martin says, like, oh God, I wish I was as clever as Tyrion. And you can make an argument of whether or not that becomes a fault in his writing, but the sentiment totally makes sense. If I had more time, I would totally take this screenwriting class. It actually seemed like a lot of fun, and I think I'd get a lot out of it. I just have too much going on right now, so I just hope that what comes out of this is I learned enough about, screenwriting. We did like a formatting exercise where he showed us a sample script, and I thought, this is a really well-formatted script. And he was like, the formatting of the script sucks, and he kind of broke down all the problems with it. And little things like that really just planted seeds in my head of what I could do to make, so if I was going to write a screenplay, which I hope to soon, what I could do to make it a lot better. So that was really fantastic. The guy's name is Jacob Krueger, and he teaches all sorts of classes, everything from, how to adapt a novel to how to write for in a TV writer's room to all sorts of different things. The class is called something like Write Your Screenplay. So check that out. I highly recommend it. Weird to give it a rating, but I'm just gonna say, take these classes. It's 5 stars with confidence out of 5. Woo! No joke, I was on the train coming home from this class, and I started to write a screenplay called Murder School. Could be a TV show, could be a movie, post-apocalyptic world. We'll see. So continuing on this post-apocalyptic theme, I started watching 2 TV shows this week that carry on that kind of sentiment. The first one I'm going to talk about is Will Forte's The Last of Us. It was created by Will Forte, but also produced by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. The character is called Phil Miller, which is hilarious. Those are the guys who did like the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Very cool guy. My screenwriting guy there, Jacob Krueger, actually went to school with Phil Lord, so had some great stories about how the Lego Movie was actually very much a boring assignment for him, but he approached it from the perspective of like, why are there so many rules I have to follow when writing like a franchise movie? And there you go, that translated into Chris Pratt's character in the movie as this guy that was like, there are so many rules, and then everything becomes interesting when those rules get broken and you have the master builder. So that was all cool. But anyway, so Will Forte, what's interesting about this show is it is a far better version of a little play that I wrote last year for Danton. You met Danton in an interview a couple weeks ago. I wrote a short play for him for a little festival he was putting on in Philadelphia, and he was trying to do this kind of apocalyptic theme, so I was like, okay, I'll write a little play. And my little play was called If You Were the Last Man on Earth. Pretty similar title, pretty similar premise. My premise was, what if there were only 2 people left on Earth, and they basically held in their hands the ability to restart the human race or not, and they just didn't want to. Like, there just wasn't any attraction there. And unfortunately, I don't think I milked that premise very well. The characters weren't that interesting. There was a little bit too much exposition. There wasn't a lot of reason to care about them. And it was just a short little 10-minute play. But that premise is milked for far more milk in The Last Man on Earth. This is a show that starts with Will Forte, and I'm just going to spoil a few things, so if you want to watch it, skip this. But I love the fact that we get like 20 minutes of just him, an average guy doing ridiculous stuff, taking advantage of the fact that he is the last man on Earth, and he's, you know, playing with like bowling things in parking lots and driving into buildings, and, you know, bowling with aquariums and all sorts of crazy stuff, and it's tons of fun. And he's like, oh, a store, oh, the door's locked, gone. All these kind of things where you're like, yeah, I can see that. Like, there's a hilariousness to it and a sense of like total reckless abandon. Although, of course, the entire time I'm watching the show, I'm thinking like, oh my god, I feel so bad for whoever I had to clean that, because you're simulating this idea of like, no one needs to clean anything, I'm the last man on Earth. But you get to see him just totally have fun with that, and that's Will Forte's like it taking over. But then he finally meets Kristen Schaal, who is the last woman on Earth, and again, very similar to my play, they just are not interested in reproducing. So that's a really cool premise that I like, and you know, they've got a dynamic that's really funny to watch. You know, Will Forte again has this reckless abandon, and then Kristen Schaal's character is still very like, well, we have to follow the rules and we have to do everything right, we need to stop at the stop signs and don't park in handicap spots, and watching that tension between them is really kind of fun. And by the end of the first episode, or I guess the second episode, because they both air together, they reach this kind of nice thing where, you know, they're kind of angry at each other, and then he helps her create a garden by making this ridiculous makeshift rig from a water tower, and it's really fun. I'm enjoying it a lot. I look forward to seeing where it goes. I'll definitely be watching the rest of it this season, and I'll use it as a learning opportunity, because, you know, I spent a few hours working on my play, and that was, for all intents and purposes, the best I could come up with, and this is so much better. So it's a great learning opportunity for me to see how my writing and how my brainstorming can improve. So I'm going to watch the rest of the season, and maybe I'll get back to you at the end and tell you what I thought. But for now, I'm giving it 5 stars with a confidence of 3. And the other post-apocalyptic show is the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. It's Tina Fey's show that was supposed to be on NBC, but then NBC totally nixed their Thursday comedy block. Parks and Rec is gone, and NBC didn't get any other good comedies. I don't know a single good comedy left on NBC. Community's on Yahoo. Who knows what they're going to do now? But it went right to Netflix. So this is starring Erin from The Office. You remember that cute little secretary? And it's very much a Tina Fey kind of character who's like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and dealing with a world that's kind of strangely mean to her in not necessarily ways, but she kind of, you know, has a sunshiny disposition to it all. And she's got a roommate who I remember from the Queen of Jordan spin-off in 30 Rock. But it's a very funny show. It's very light. There's not a lot of depth to it. In a weird way, I think the Will Forte show has a little bit more exploration of like the human condition than this. But it's fun, I'll say that. The premise is that you have these mole women that were taken in by a cult leader, and they're underground for a long time, and then they come out like 20 years later. They were there in the 90s, and they come out now, and it's like, oh, the world isn't actually over, so what do we do now? And you know, it's a fun premise, and I've only seen the first 2.5 episodes, but I like the characters. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the show right now. Check it out. It's on Netflix. You can binge the entire season if you want to. Fun. Just finished watching Better Call Saul episode 650. No idea why it was called 50. This was an interesting episode. This satisfied, I don't know what the f was going to be. This satisfied a lot of the cravings I've been having so far for the show. This was new information about the characters already established. It's just bonus that it's about a character that we also know about on Breaking Bad. It felt like a different kind of show, though. This didn't feel like Breaking Bad. It didn't feel like Better Call Saul. It felt like a totally separate prequel show with Mike. There was a different tone, a different shooting style. The dialogue felt different. This felt to me like play dialogue, like a well-made play, and I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment. Especially the monologues Mike had with his daughter-in-law felt kind of stilted. I don't know if it was the acting or just the writing. I do think some of the lines were borderline unreadable, but it suffered because of that, I think. I found myself focusing too much on the lines being said in the acting and not enough in the scenes. I mean, there's a lot of monologues in this, and it runs into that problem that plays run into a lot too, where no one speaks that long uninterrupted, where the only thing the other person is doing is watching them. It worked, I think, for the purposes of the story. I think the story here, let me say that, I'm talking about all these little nitpicky things. The story here of Mike and where he came from and how he became who he is, perfect. Not a huge surprise, like it didn't need to be. This was absolutely what we needed to understand how Mike became who he is. This history, I think Jonathan Banks said a few days ago, Mike has lost his soul, and I think that's been apparent from the first day we saw Mike. This was a guy with a screwed up past, and we didn't know what it was, and this fits that perfectly. This is a guy who has a son who held him up on a pedestal. They were both cops. His son probably joined the force because he wanted to be like his dad. He was a clean cop. It reminds me a little bit of Bradley Cooper's character in The Place Beyond the Pines. Fantastic movie. I recommend that a lot. 5 stars, Confidence 5. And yeah, his son's this clean cop in a dirty cop district where all the cops are skimming, all the cops are kind of involved in things, and any cop that's trying to be clean is jeopardizing everyone. And geez, it's so brutal to think, it was nice to hold off that reveal until the end that Mike was also a dirty cop. It would have been nice to establish a little bit early on how much Mike's son held him up on a pedestal. I think that would have made that more of a gut punch to know that, his son really, really loved his dad. And I think it was a good choice to not show his son, to keep him as this memory, because I think we understand who he is without needing to see an actor portray him. Some moments in this did remind me of Breaking Bad. The whole, getting the notepad thing, I could totally see that being what gives Mike the idea to start using, or not Mike, Saul the idea to start using Huel later on, stuff with Jesse and like grabbing cigarettes and that kind of stuff. It's a nice little precedent there. The whole scene with Mike and the 2 cops, I mean, this is just evocative of Breaking Bad, but thinking about when Walt rescues Jesse, the hit and run kind of thing, which we already kind of saw a little bit of a callback to with Saul in the very first episode. But I'm grateful for this episode. I'm glad that Saul took a back seat. It was really nice to focus on Mike. Jonathan Banks is a fantastic actor. When he started to tear up at the end, that actually did get me. That was the first real powerful emotional moment I've had in this series so far. So props to him. The actress playing his daughter was fine, but again, I think she got hung up on some of that dialogue, which again was hard to say, but it was tough for me to really buy the relationship between them. I know they're probably, there's a little bit of a distance between them now, but I think about the way that Bob Odenkirk and the actress playing Kim, right off the bat, their chemistry is there's a history there. They've been friends and maybe sometimes lovers, and there's all sorts of complexity there, and it shows. With Mike and the actress playing his daughter, or the daughter-in-law, I'm not sure that we ever feel like there ever was a real relationship between them. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe they've never been close. Maybe they've always been standoffish. But I feel like this episode, again, the story is fantastic, but in the execution of it all, there's little things that could have been done that just would have helped more. Directorially, there were some weird choices, this is a zoom into Mike's back in black and zooming out in a different scene, which felt like Birdman or Alfred Hitchcock's Rope or something like that. That's a fine little camera trick, but then there were some basic rules of cinematography that even I understand that were being broken here. And you'd imagine they'd be intentional, but I just don't know. There's a simple rule in filming called the 180-degree rule. So if you have a person here and a person here, the camera should never basically be flipping so that this is what we're seeing now. So if person A is here and person B is here, the camera should never be moved in such a way where those characters are reversed. It screws with your eyes, and that was happening a lot in this episode. And it happened so much I have to believe it was intentional, but I don't know what it was accomplishing besides screwing up, how things work visually. For a great example on this, I'm thinking about a video essay someone did on The Dark Knight Rises and the big scene with the Joker and the rocket launcher and driving through the streets of Gotham, and how that's actually a great example of breaking this rule way too much and making it very difficult to visually track what's happening. These are just dialogue scenes in Breaking Bad, so it's not like we ever forgot that they're in a house or whatever. But strange choices. I'm looking forward to listening to the Breaking Bad Insider podcast, which I'm all cut up on now, and hearing a little bit more about what was motivating this. I don't know if the director or the writer of this episode had been involved in Breaking Bad before, but again, it felt like a very different show. Anyway, I enjoyed this, but it's tough for me to think about how I'm going to feel about it in a while. Again, I'm so glad this story was told, but the episode itself, for now, I'm going to give it 4 stars, but a confidence of 2. We'll see how I feel later. Movies.
news.
Continuing with this wonderful post-apocalyptic theme we've got going, I finally saw the Hunger Games Mockingjay. I was not a fan of the first Hunger Games movie. Then I read the books. Really liked the books, actually. The third one was not as great. But the second one I was kind of like, oh, they're doing the games thing again? Fine, it's fun. And then the movie came out, and I thought the movie was actually a fantastic adaptation of the second book. Just a really snappy, action-packed, great acting, great characters kind of movie. And then, I was curious how they were going to do this third movie thing, because Hollywood's doing this weird thing where every movie needs to be split into two, and this is like the seventh Harry Potter book. This is not a book that needed to be split into two. But I finally saw the movie. I didn't see it in theaters, and yeah, I still don't think it needed to be split into two. I'll say that I think that the script writers, which included Danny Strong, who's been a character actor in everything from like Mad Men to 30 Rock to Parks and Recreation, all the thousand things, did a really good job here. In that I'm sure it was not their choice to split the movie into two, and given what they had to work with, I think they actually wrote a pretty good script that, used some of that extra breathing room to have a little bit more character development, a few subplots that I thought were kind of interesting, but also some very obvious fluff. Some scenes definitely went on a little bit too long, again, maybe it's because of everything going on at Better Call Saul lately, but I'm very aware of pacing and when things should be a cut and when things like to breathe. So, I think there are some issues with that in this movie. When a character gets upset, I'm thinking about Jennifer Lawrence's cry face here. When a character gets upset, it's nice to be there with them. If you feel like you've suffered with them and you're there on their journey and things are hurting them, then, sometimes if they're choked up, you can get choked up. I think about how Harry Potter felt in the fourth Harry Potter movie and the book after Cedric Diggory dies. Spoiler alert! And that for me is an incredibly powerful moment, both in the book and the movie. Like, I am right there with Harry when he, touches the Triwizard Cup and comes back and everything's horrible. And I was kind of expecting to have a moment like that somewhere in the Hunger Games so far, and it really hasn't happened. And I can't really pinpoint why. All I can say is that nothing has had that emotional resonance where it's like, I'm right there with you, Katniss. Ah! And, there's a lot of Jennifer Lawrence, or Katniss, really crying in this movie, and I don't blame her. I'm sure it was the directing and all that kind of stuff, but I just didn't think it was justified. There's a lot of her being really upset, and it feels pouty, it feels overdramatic, it feels like she isn't rising to the occasion that she needs to, and part of that is, just the nature of the character, and like, I didn't ask for this, and the reluctant hero and that kind of thing, but part of it is just kind of like, get it together, and the fact that she cries about Peeta so much and that kind of thing, like, they were never that close, and I think you either need to develop that relationship more, which I guess it's too late for that now, or just don't fixate on it so much, have things happen a little bit snappier. That being said, I think there were still some great moments in the movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman's fantastic. I think Julianne Moore does a good job with President Coin having that kind of sternness and lack of showmanship. A lot of people are actually kind of knocking the whole, the filming probo thing and how silly that kind of was. I actually kind of like that. That's an aspect of, the war movie that you haven't really seen before. There's a lot of original things going on here. And, I actually really enjoyed that kind of whole, like, okay, well, we're going to, stage you in the scene and, oh, this isn't working, get rid of the green screen. Let's bring you out to the real battlefield. Oh my God, there's real battle. And I think a lot of that actually works really well. So, I enjoyed the movie. I think it ended in a weird place. I would have probably gone a little bit further than it did instead of, spoiler alert, instead of just having that moment of Peeta looking insane. I would have actually gone forward as far as about to raid the Capitol, because I think, if you're splitting these into two movies, there is enough that goes on in that final raid on the Capitol, I think, to take up, a good solid, tight hour-and-a-half movie. And so I would have, gone right up to that moment where they're about to, like, maybe you're like, you see the Capitol from a distance and everyone's approaching and cut to black, cut to white, whatever. That's just my opinion, but, again, enjoyed the movie pretty much. I'm going to give it 3 stars with a confidence of 2. No, 2? Why would I say 2? No, I got a pretty good idea of how much I liked it. Confidence of 3. Another movie, just because Netflix kept recommending it to me, my wife and I watched A Good Marriage. Stephen King's A Good Marriage last night. Kind of like The Hunger Games, this felt like a short story that, did not need to be blown up into quite the size it was. I haven't even checked. I'm going to guess this was not based on one of Stephen King's 800-page novels. It was probably based on a short story. Very simple premise. Spoiling. Wife finds out that her husband is a serial killer. How does she deal with it? Biggest problem with this movie for me, the wife isn't very smart. and the serial killer husband is way too nonchalant about everything. Like, she finds out, and there's a nice little tense scene where he's like, well, you know, you didn't clear your browser history, and you didn't put everything back the way you found it, so I know you know I'm a serial killer. But then he just has this very kind of casual, like, well, honey, you gotta understand, it wasn't me. It's this voice in my head, and you know, here's the weird thing. He tells her, I have the ability to shut that voice out, but then I thought, you know what, why not? I'll kill a couple people if I get caught, then too bad, but if not, well, then at least I did it. And I don't understand how he could possibly think that she would be okay with that. And he's like, look, you know, I'll stop now if you ask me to, but it's like, clearly you never should have begun. And no matter what kind of relationship you have, if your husband's a murderer, serial killer, or whatever, there's a certain amount of trust that you need to have. And I think him being like, well, you know, I didn't tell you I'm killing these women and all that, is kind of on par with an affair, at least. So, you know, it's very weird to come home and be like, oh, honey, yeah, you know, you found out I'm having an affair, but, you know, let's just forget about that, move on like nothing happened. I won't do it anymore. So anyway, so there was kind of a lightness to that. That being said, it was still kind of a fun movie. You know, it had a few moments, but I think you could probably do the whole thing in about 20 minutes. It could be a great little, you know, tiny episode of television. So, you know, good acting. The actor, the main guy, kind of sounded like Liam Neeson, and that's a fun voice. So just for that, I'm gonna give it 2 stars. So 2 stars with a confidence of 4. Stephen King's A Good Marriage. Articles. Finished this month's issue of Wired. This was an interesting issue. It was the sex issue. And funnily enough, quick story, my wife is tutoring a kid in our neighborhood right now, and she was trying to introduce him to the wonderful world of Wired. This was not the right issue to do that for. So it's kind of this like, oh, check it. Oh, no, don't look at that. Oh, don't look at that article either. In fact, no, don't read Wired right now. But there's some really fascinating stuff in this. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff about teledildonics and whatever, you know, the way technology is revolutionizing the dating industry. And you know what? I've been married to my wife for a few years now, and we've been together since 2004, so I'm totally out of this whole new technology age of dating. And it's kind of fascinating to see how different apps and different websites and different abilities of VR are starting to change how that kind of stuff works, whether it's for one-night stands or, you know, being able to maintain a relationship over long distances. One of the most interesting things in this month's issue, and this is something I really was not aware about at all, is this idea of asexuality or demisexuality being a thing. I had never met anyone, I don't know if I'm friends with anyone that identifies as this, but this idea of someone just not having sexual feelings or much at all. So asexual is you're just really not sexually attracted to anyone, and demisexual is like maybe I'm sexually attracted to 2 people in the entire world, or I'm only sexually attracted to someone when I've been dating them and cuddling them for 5 years or something like that. So I found this really educational because this was not something I knew was out there, and it really got me thinking about how difficult that would be to, you know, basically grow up and be called like a prude because you're not dating around, and it's not because of your religious beliefs or anything like that, but you really have no interest. And, you know, I'm sure that ends up with a lot of people with hurt feelings, and maybe you like someone a lot, but you really have absolutely no interest in anything beyond cuddling. So anyway, this was a really helpful issue for opening my eyes, at least, and I consider myself to be a fairly knowledgeable person about the world. This was something I knew nothing about, and I thank Wired for telling the world about this, and I hope more people are open to coming out of the closet, so to speak, or whatever room in their house this kind of sexual preference ends up in. But so really fascinating stuff. So I recommend check out this entire month's issue of Wired. It's the sex issue and some really good stuff. I'll actually link specifically to that article about asexuality and demisexuality. Yeah, 5 stars. Confidence of 5. Thanks, Wired. Okay, that's it for this week. Thank you for watching. I don't want to say this because I don't know if it's going to happen for sure, but it's possible this might need to take a week or 2 of a break because the next couple weeks are really busy. This coming week I'm going up to Burlington to look at a project that my company might be doing. It's the new Moran coal plant up in Burlington, Vermont. Super cool project. Check out the website, moranplant.org. And then the week after that, I'm going to visit my dad in Florida. But this next week's going to be really fun. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of stuff that I'm going to have to talk about. So hopefully I get a chance to do even a short episode maybe on next week sometime to just be able to discuss that very briefly. So I hope you check that out. Videos this week. Let's start with a video review of Rum Run. I mentioned it very briefly in Alhambra. This is the first game that I worked on really hard with. I won a contest for thegamecrafter.com for a mashup contest. It's a mashup between the games of Dominoes and Mancala, and I put it together very quickly, won the contest, that was great. And then my friend Morgan Shaw, who brought Alhambra this weekend, of course, looked at it and was like, this could be so much better looking. And so he actually totally redesigned the rulebook, the artwork, these flowcharts. It's a really beautiful looking game now. Lindsay Davis, someone who went to architecture school, did the box art. So I'm really proud of this game. It took, a couple years of development, and I think it's in a place where there's really something there for everyone. If you're a super abstract kind of chess player, it can be played purely as that kind of game. If you like more chance-based elements, if you like objective cards, that's all in there too. There's like events that can happen that kind of affect the board in interesting ways. So it can feel as abstract or themed or storied or narrative as you want. So I think that's kind of cool. So this is a video that someone at To The Table made that actually just describes how to play the game. So that's really nice of them to put that together. There's also a great review on Father Geek. I'll put that down there too. So people like the game. That's great. Maybe someday I'll do a Kickstarter for it or something. I don't know. For now, it's kind of expensive, but if you like games, buy it. I don't make any money. It's just the cost of making it. So that's cool. And I meant to post this a couple weeks ago, but now that Spider-Man's joining the Avengers and he's going to be in Captain America Civil War, and that's all super cool, I put this video together a couple weeks ago. This was actually going to be something for Screen Junkies like last year, but it didn't pan out because it needed to be like 1,000 superheroes all interacting at once. But here's like a little proof of concept I did, putting Wolverine with that Spider-Man train fight with Dr. Octopus. So, it's not actually the Avengers here, but Hugh Jackman, he's saying like, yeah, I want to join the Avengers too. Let's make it happen. Fox, Sony, Marvel, let's all be friends. So who knows, maybe that'll happen sometime soon. But here's Spider-Man and Wolverine and Dr. Octopus having a big train fight. Pretty cool. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. If you have anything you want to recommend to me, let me know below, and I will see you next week. And I will see you next week.